From the 16th century onwards, the first Jewish people settled in the city of Groningen. It was not easy for them to build a life here. Membership of the guilds was forbidden to them, so there was only a limited choice of work. From 1728 onwards, the Jewish people had civil rights, which made life more pleasant. Slowly, they gained the same rights as any other citizen. Many Jewish people moved to the city to try their luck, to live and to participate in society. In 1941, the Jewish community in Groningen had 2,843 members. This high number was partly caused by the fact that some 250 Jewish people from Germany came to the city to flee the rising Nazism. One of them was Eugen Stoppelman, who came to Groningen with his family. Eugen Stoppelman, a Jewish boy born on the 29th of November 1920. He grew up in the north of Germany in a small town called Nordenham. Eugen and his family fled their hometown, escaping the threat of Nazism, seeking safety in Groningen. With a father originally from Groningen and many family members still in the area, this was meant to be a safe place for them, a home where they could escape the devastation of war. Holocaust survivor Simon Gronowski, a 93-year-old Belgian man living in Brussels, shares his story to illustrate the conditions that Eugen, Simon and millions of other Jewish people faced during the Holocaust.
Le 10 mai 1940, 1940, Hitler heeft Nederland, Frankrijk en België aangevallen. De nazi hebben maatregelen genomen, altijd tegen de Joden. Op een zekere ogenblik plicht een gele ster te dragen. C'est comme ça que j'ai vu que les Allemands sont arrivés.
The German invasion brought the Nazi regime into power, which forced Eugen and so many other Jewish people out of their homes, making them leave everything behind. By the spring of 1942, Eugen, his brother and his father found themselves in labor camp de Vlede. Day after day, he worked the fields under grueling conditions, with little relief from the physical and emotional strain. After a few months, the Stoppelman family was reunited. While they were back together, they were all prisoners now, this time at Kamp Westerbork. To the outside world, it seemed like an ordinary labor camp. There was a school, a hospital, and even a factory for daily work. There were sports competitions and cultural activities that gave the impression of normal life. But beneath that carefully constructed illusion was a much harsher reality. When Eugen and his family were registered at Westerbork in October 1942, they arrived during one of the camp's busiest and most chaotic periods.
We weten bijvoorbeeld dat oktober 1942 een hele drukke periode is geweest. In 1 weekend kwamen er meer dan 14.000 mensen bij in dit kamp. En daar zijn ook wel verhalen bekend van dat mensen buiten lagen te slapen, of op de vloer van een barak, en soms inderdaad bedden delen. En altijd dus heel veel mensen om je heen. Dat lees je in bijna alle verslagen van mensen die het zelf hebben overleefd. Dat je hier nooit alleen was.
Deportations from Westerbork had become a grim routine. Trains left the camp twice a week, packed with men, women and children.
Er komt iemand binnen, een barakaudste, zelf ook gevangene, die heeft de lijst gekregen. En daarop staan in alfabetische volgorde alle namen van de mensen die weg moeten. En die wordt dan voorgelezen, vaak als de mensen al 's avonds in bed liggen. En dat is toch het moment waar iedereen met angst en met spanning naar uitkijkt. Wat is jouw naam erbij? Wordt je naam niet opgenoemd, dan is dat een opluchting. Je mag weer wat langer in Westerbork blijven. En wordt je naam wel opgenoemd, ja, dan ga je de volgende dag naar het onbekende.
After just 3 brief days in Camp Westerbork, the Stoppelman family heard their names spoken coldly as they too were summoned for transport.
Et le 19 avril, on a été mis dans le wagon à bestiaux. Dans le wagon, c'était un noir total. Il n'y avait pas de lumière. Dans ce wagon, je ne comprenais rien. J'avais 11 ans. Hein. J'étais encore dans l'univers des scouts. Mais tout le monde croyait qu'il partait pour travailler. Je ne savais pas que j'avais été condamné à mort et que ce train devait me conduire sur les lieux de mon exécution.
The journey lasted 3 long days and nights across Germany. The only sounds were the cries of children and the groans of the elderly. Food was scarce and water was fought for during brief, chaotic stops where only the fortunate few managed to drink. At Kosel, the first selection took place. Eugen and his brother were torn away from their parents in a heart-wrenching moment of separation. They watched helplessly as their parents vanished into the distance, knowing they would never see them again. Eugen and his brother were taken to Camp St. Annaberg, where the last pieces of their identity were taken from them. After a short time in St. Annaberg, the brothers Stoppelman were transported to Blechhammer, a work camp under the command of the Smelt Company. In the camp, prisoners worked under brutal conditions on the Baustelle, performing hard labour in groups of 15, watched by violent guards. The relentless labour, combined with the severe lack of nutrition in the camps, forced Eugen and his brother to organise for survival, smuggling, bartering and crafting to secure what they needed. When his brother was caught with 50 marks used to buy bread, he endured brutal punishments but never confessed. In April 1944, Blechhammer became part of Auschwitz under SS control. Even though he had an Auschwitz number, he stayed a prisoner of Blechhammer.
Because prisons in occupied Poland were quickly overcrowded, the Nazis made the decision to open concentration camps. And they chose this place for the concentration camp mainly because most of the buildings, which you can see here, they existed before the war. Pre-war Polish military barracks. So the Nazis made the decision to reuse infrastructure which already existed. The idea was to open very small concentration camp for Polish political prisoners, and the whole idea later changed. Auschwitz became the biggest complex of concentration camps in Europe and the biggest death camp, the biggest center of mass extermination of Jews.
Auschwitz I, a camp with 20 brick blocks that once held 24,000 prisoners. Prisoners slept in wooden bunks, crammed 3 to a tier. Around 300 people were packed into each room, meaning 1,200 lived in a single block. There was no comfort, no space, and no privacy. The block had only 22 toilets for everyone. Access was strictly limited, and even this basic necessity became a daily struggle. Every morning, prisoners had to stand for roll call. This happened early, in the freezing cold or rain. They stood for hours, unable to move, fearing the harsh punishment that came for the smallest mistake. Stoppelman faced the same torment in Blechhammer, often at 4 a.m. Survival in Auschwitz I meant being able to work. Labor was constant and brutal. For those who became too weak, there was no mercy. If you couldn't work, you died. Here, approximately 70,000 prisoners lost their lives to starvation, disease, or execution.
There were 4 gas chambers and crematoria in Birkenau. At the end of tracks, there were 2 in the wood, 2 more. Number 1 was in Auschwitz I, but because it wasn't efficient enough, Germans decided to build 4 huge crematoria with gas chambers here in Auschwitz to Birkenau. Victims were transferred from ghettos and transit camps, and here families were separated. It was the last time when people saw their family members. We are standing on the ramp on a selection place in Birkenau. It's a very important historical place. This ramp was built especially for deportation of the Jews to the gas chambers. Educated people who should have helped other people with one gesture made decision, left or right, life or death. We are standing by the ruins of crematorium number 5 because crematorium and the gas chamber number 1 in Auschwitz wasn't efficient enough, and the Nazis wanted to extend mass extermination of the Jews in Auschwitz. They decided to build 4 big crematoria with gas chambers here in Birkenau. After selection, victims were forced to walk from the ramp, the strongest, to the registration buildings. Most of the Jews, 75–80%, were forced to walk to the gas chambers. In the gas chamber number 2 on the other side of the camp, its surface was 210 square meters. The commandant of Auschwitz testified that it was possible to kill at the same time at least 1,500 people, 1,500 people.
It is extraordinary that, under these circumstances, a person could survive. Eugen and his brother relied on each other to make it this far. For Eugen, friendship was more than just a bond. It was a choice between life and death. January 19th, 1945. As the Russians advanced from the east, the SS were forced to retreat westward, taking all the prisoners with them, including the Stoppelman brothers. It was the dead of winter when they began their march. The journey ahead was relentless, 200 kilometers on foot. They started as 3,500 men. By the end, only 1,000 remained. The fate of those who faltered was merciless. Anyone unable to continue was executed on the spot. After 13 days and 200 kilometers of walking, Eugen arrived in labor camp Gross Rosen. Eugen saw healthy people being beaten to death with clubs by capos for no reason. The only hope there was to either leave that place or die quickly. For Eugen, Gross Rosen was the worst camp of all. After nearly 2 weeks in Gross Rosen, Eugen, Emil and their fellow prisoners were put on a train to Buchenwald, their 7th camp. After surviving another camp for 2 weeks, the brothers Stoppelman had to face a second death march. Eugen often collapsed into unconsciousness, but his friends picked him up each time. Otherwise, he would have been shot. During this march, Emil suffered a frozen left foot. He forced himself to keep moving, dragging his injured leg step by step. Emil, now stricken with fever, could go no further. SS soldiers had to take Eugen and his fellow prisoners to Sachsenhausen because American tanks had reached Camp Buchenwald. They had to walk and survive for a whole month. Where to? Even the SS men didn't know. One fateful night, as Stoppelman and the others lay in a forest, they were abruptly awakened by the thunder of artillery fire. By morning, when they looked around, there was no sign of their guards. The so-called esteemed SS officers had fled, abandoning them entirely. While Eugen fought for his freedom and his life, Auschwitz was liberated by the Russians on January 27, 1945. And on May 5, 1945, Eugen Stoppelman would finally find his own freedom. In 1942, Eugen, along with his family, unknowingly boarded a train that would lead them into the heart of darkness. 3.5 years later, after surviving 8 different concentration camps, 3 grueling death marches, and facing unimaginable horrors alone, he returned to Groningen. Left to rebuild his life from nothing, Eugen had to start again, just like Simon Gronowski, who, by a twist of fate, escaped his transport to Auschwitz and survived.
Avec l'impression que les hommes de mon wagon, encouragés par le bruit de l'attaque, essayaient d'ouvrir la porte de l'intérieur. Alors, à un certain moment, ma mère me réveille. Le train roule, mais la porte est ouverte. Alors, ma mère m'a pris par la main, elle m'a conduit vers la porte, et puis elle m'a fait sauter du train. Et j'attendais ma mère, je pensais qu'elle allait également sauter. Et j'entendais les gardiens qui venaient de l'avant dans ma direction en tirant des coups de feu et en hurlant en allemand. Mais je pensais qu'elle me suivrait. Mais moi, j'ai couru. Toute la nuit, j'ai couru dans les bois et les champs.
At the age of 25, he left Groningen behind and started over in Amsterdam. He found a job as a salesman and met the love of his life. A year after the war, he married Ellen Frankenhuis. Together, they had 4 children. At the age of 60, Stoppelman died of cancer.
Du bist een dikke drömer. Die leven, dat is hier en nou. Bij die een huis en zijn een vrouw. Dit vlakke land is nou die land. Lotte, hij staat hier over Lotte. De rijkdom van beloofde land. Het is niks als een bak met zand. Touw gewoon naar je voet.